What if what we call public opinion was just a manufactured narrative that makes it easier to convince people that if their views are different, then there's something wrong with that, or there's something wrong with them?
Spending is a tax. As soon as the government spends money, eventually it's a tax. Sometimes we put a direct tax on the people, sometimes we borrow the money, and sometimes we print the money.
Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth.
The Patrick Riggins Show. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome again this week to the Patrick Riggins Show, saving you from the lies of the beautiful people. Little 6 a.m. to kick off the show this week. You do need to be on the lookout for that, the lies of the beautiful people. The beautiful people being a metaphor for the people who we put on pedestals, whether they be physically beautiful or not. Too many of us here in this country, we put the president and or our congressional representatives on this pedestal of unerring benevolence, that this person is someone who is looking out for our best interests and that of our country. Frequently, though, nothing could be further from the truth. And speaking of the truth, that's all you get here on the premier show of the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network, that being the Patrick Riggins Show. We're also heard here locally in Knoxville, Tennessee on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Being in radio and having access to all kinds and sorts of listener research and demographics, I know that quite a few people in this audience stay pretty busy throughout the week, and I take that into account when I'm putting together the show. So if you only get 2 or 3 hours to catch up on the news each weekend, I try to make this hour one of the more productive ones. For instance, a lot of you working might not have noticed, but we had a government shutdown this week.
Shut your ass.
I know it's hard to believe, especially if you're the independent type of person, meaning you aren't dependent on government for everything. But in case you haven't heard, we are in the midst of a government shutdown. The interesting thing is, personally, I haven't noticed it one bit. It's funny, though, to listen to both sides trying to play this game of, I got you, not just in government, but people out here in flyover land as well. It's exactly what I talked about during the whole Trayvon Martin debacle. These people aren't trying to do what's best for the country. They're trying to do what's best for their team. We have a whole bunch of American citizens doing the same thing. Some people are rooting for the Republicans, and some people are rooting for the Democrats. But no one is really rooting for America, because 90% of what's going on in Washington is un-American. Demanding that someone else pay your medical bills is un-American. Demanding that someone else pay your food bill, it's un-American. Demanding that someone else pay your rent or mortgage, that's un-American. Both sides are cheering on their team, and no one cares what's happening to our country. All the Republicans want is to hand the Democrats a defeat and vice versa. Even talking to Democrats out here, as I mentioned, in flyover country, they'll tell me, I don't 100% agree with Obamacare, but we have to stand behind our president. Now, this is a good thing? This is what it means to be an American? Standing up for bad legislation just because your side passed it? Politics has become a big ego fest. It's all about winning. It has nothing to do with making the country work better. It has nothing to do with making us stronger as a nation. It's all about people's ego and whatever we can chalk up a win or not. My team has to win. I'm pulling for this side or that side, and I want victory. Doesn't matter if it derails our country. Doesn't matter if it's the right thing to do or not. Obamacare is the law of the land. Yeah? Well, so was slavery. Was that a good idea? No. It, too, was the law of the land. In fact, the Supreme Court even ruled it constitutional, just like Obamacare. If we're saying it's okay, and in fact legal, to take money from one citizen to pay the bills of another, be their medical or food or housing, whatever, if we're going to say that's legal, then we're saying slavery is legal. A slave didn't get to keep the money they earned for the plantation owner. They had to work in the fields all day just so someone else could enjoy the fruits of their labor. They didn't get any of the money they were making for their master. It all went to him. Here the government is saying, if you earn money, you have no choice but to give part of your money to another citizen that didn't earn it. You're a slave to that person. They're your master. They aren't doing anything for that money, yet you still owe it to them. That person is promising you nothing in return. The money is just taken at the point of a gun. If you don't want to pay for this other person's bills, then you'll be punished. The government will confiscate your property and sell it in order to be able to give money to this other person. Same thing for slaves. The plantation owner isn't promising them anything. He owns them. They have no choice but to work for him. If they don't, they're punished. That's what our beloved country has become. Our once free country. We've become slaves in a once free country. All because Congress wants to use your money, the money you work hard to earn. It wants to use your money to buy votes. None of it is allowed by our Constitution. Every single person in government who voted for this or is working to maintain this system is a traitor to this country, plain and simple. No other way to put it. If you're working to blatantly violate the Constitution of the United States, then you're a traitor. I don't know what else you can call it. That includes just about all present sitting congressional representatives and the president. I don't care who they are. I can go through their voting records and find numerous examples of them voting for legislation that violates the Constitution. I'm sure I could find multiple examples every week. 95% of what's going on in government is not allowed or listed as a power under our Constitution. Are you happy with that? Are you satisfied that our government is no longer of, by, and for the people? So you need to start working to get these people kicked out of office. There's really no other way to correct this. We're reaping the harvest of not participating in the political process in years past. All of this has been building while you've been putting off voting, putting off going to that town meeting, putting off attending that political rally. This is the culmination of half of this nation's eligible voters not bothering to show up on Election Day. If you don't want to do the very minimal work of trying to save this country, then there are people out there who are surely going to ruin it. They'll do the work. They'll get into office. They'll get these unconstitutional things passed. All the while, you decided you didn't want to bother. Something was better on television. I was tired after work. Besides, I hate politics and politicians. Hey, that's fine. I understand completely. The only problem is you aren't insulated from whatever it is they want to do. You might not want anything to do with them, but they for sure want something to do with you. And they have the force of law working for them, otherwise known as government. If you aren't going to participate in government, then you're going to become a victim of it. What I mean by that is what I talked about last week. In case you missed it, you can go to our YouTube archives, youtube.com/Patrick Regan Show. But I quoted John Philpott Curran, and in part he said, "The condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance." In other words, God has blessed you with liberty, but it's up to you to keep it. All throughout our history, the founders of this country warned us over and over about a government that would become increasingly tyrannical should we allow it. And this is what we're living today. Our government spies on us without warrants, murders around the world without trials, demands money from us at the point of a gun to fund wasteful and unconstitutional programs. It is going to be up to us to reverse this trend, or we'll be enslaved by it. All right, we're up on the first break of the Patrick Regan Show. When we come back, we'll have some more on this government shutdown. I know you can't believe it, but it's actually happened this week. We'll also talk about Obamacare and getting to the root of all these problems. Join us after these messages from our lovely sponsors. Oh, yeah, the devil inside. Every single one of us has the devil inside. Little advice from the band In Excess. Welcome back to the Patrick Regan Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and locally on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. You know, this is why we have a Constitution right here. This is why you need to watch the people you elect to represent you. Every single one of them has the devil inside. Every single one of them is capable of self-dealing and not living up to the standards they should. Our founders knew that, but somewhere along the way, the population of our country has forgotten it or ignored it. Either way, the results are the same, an out-of-control government. We're seeing the effects of that right now. A government that's increasingly demanding more and more money from the citizens of this country. It's like a huge growing monster feeding on money, and as it gets bigger, it requires more and more of it. That's the difference between you and the government. You survive on food and water. The government survives on money. If we run out of money, no more government. But you'll still survive because you live outside the matrix. You don't require something as amorphous as currency to support your life. But getting back to the first segment where I mentioned the government shutdown. I know, right? You haven't heard anything about it all week. But talking about the shutdown, the first segment, brought some ideas to my mind during the break. This shutdown is all about politics. There's two factors involved here on both sides. Number one, it's all about making the other side look bad. If you're a Democrat, it's about making the Republicans look bad. If you're a Republican, it's about making the Democrats look bad. And two, you're demonstrating to your political base that you'll stand up to the other side. If you're conservative, you'll stand up to the liberals and vice versa. You may say, no, Patrick, you have that all wrong. Just look at how Ted Cruz and all these other Tea Party people, they're standing up for us, the American people. No, they're not. Listen when I tell you, it's all about politics. These people in Washington have heard everyone complaining out here, and it scared them. Look at how Ted Cruz was stating that the first House defunding bill wouldn't make it through the Senate. I covered it on this show a few weeks ago. All of the House members went ballistic, accusing him of pushing them to pass something, but then wasn't going to fight to get it through the Senate. And when his phone and email started blowing up with angry people, all of a sudden he saw the light. But Patrick, they're still standing up and fighting. These congressmen are welcoming veterans at the World War II memorial. They're fighting against Obamacare. Listen what I'm telling you. It's all politics. This is why you listen to this radio show. This is why this show is on the fast track to becoming one of the most influential shows on talk radio. Because I don't get blinded by all the glitter and all the pomp and circumstance. I see through all this, and by listening to this show, you will too. Back to my point, though. How can you tell this is all showmanship? How can you tell for the Republicans the Obamacare fight is all about giving President Obama and the Democrats a black eye? That on the Democrat side, it's all about shoring up their base. It's very, very simple, and it's easily overlooked. Just notice what the House is passing. On Friday, the House passed a bill to continue funding of FEMA. Not constitutional. FEMA is not provided for under the Constitution of the United States. Also on Friday, the House passed bills restoring funding for the Women, Infants, and Children food nutrition programs. Also not constitutional. The taking of money from one American citizen to pay the bills of another is not provided for in the Constitution. The House passed a bill to keep the parks and monuments open. Not constitutional. All of these, except those that are inside the District of Columbia, they're all located within states. Let the states fund the parks and monuments located within their borders, if that's what the people of that state want to do. The House also cleared a bill to retroactively pay the federal employees that have been furloughed. Now, on this, I don't have a problem with that in general because we're honoring a contract we made with that employee, that person. The work contract states that this person gets a certain amount of money per year. And we have to honor that contract, whether we have them working or not. That's the agreement. But what I do find troubling is a lot of these people are being deemed non-essential. Non-essential, meaning having little or no importance. Not essential, not necessary. So apparently, according to the press releases, we have around 800,000 employees that are deemed not necessary to complete the job at hand. Do I even need to comment further on that? The House also passed a bill funding the National Institutes of Health. Also, not in the Constitution. I know there's sick children out there. That's the argument being made, but I'm sorry, it isn't in the Constitution. Now you may say, Patrick, you're being cold-hearted. No, I'm being a realist. I'm going by the rules relayed out for our government. If we want to change those rules, there's a way to do it. It's called amending the Constitution. If we want to take money from one citizen to pay the bills of another, then put it to a vote on an amendment. If we want to have National Institutes of Health, put it to a vote and amend the Constitution. But see, we never do that because this stuff wouldn't pass. Instead, we break the rules we're supposed to be obeying and do these things anyway. Then people are surprised when the government breaks the rules and starts spying on American citizens without warrants. You can't let the government break the rules in one part of the Constitution and not expect it not to break them in another. You can't say, I don't want Obamacare telling me I have to buy insurance. The Republicans need to stay strong and fight against that. But then allow the government to demand a part of your hard-earned money just to hand it to another citizen in the form of charity. Both actions are not allowed by the Constitution. Yet you scream and yell about one while not protesting the other. This is why the Republicans sit up there in Washington telling you they're fighting for the American people. But then they vote on bills that are decidedly un-American. Look, see, we're fighting Obamacare for you. We're fighting against the government making you spend your money on something you don't want. Well, what about making me spend my money on people who don't want to pay their own bills in life? I don't want the government making me do that, yet you're passing bills demanding that I do. As I said, this is all about shoring up their respective bases. This is why you won't hear these points being made on any other program. I don't have a political party I'm trying to impress. I'm not carrying the water for one side or the other. I'm fighting for the American people, the citizens of this great country. This is why this radio show is the rarity. I'm not afraid of telling either side they're wrong, liberal or conservative, that they're screwing us, the American people. That's why I made this statement a couple of weeks ago. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. This is getting to the point where it's the government against the people. Both sides say they're working for us, but like anything, look past their rhetoric and observe their actions. That's where you find out their true objectives and their true beliefs. What's also telling is how the Senate Democrats have said they don't want to accept little bills funding parts of the government without funding all of it, namely Obamacare. But that's really how it should work every time. By passing these huge budgets, that's how all this wasteful spending gets sneaked into legislation. These people in Congress can't read through all these huge spending bills. They're much too long. Most of the watchdog groups can't either. And that's how Congress wants it. That's business as usual for them. By passing smaller funding bills, funding smaller areas of government, it's much easier to trim out the waste and watch for people abusing the system. It's exactly what Washington doesn't want. I mean, would you sign a contract that you hadn't read all the way through or at least skimmed over? If you bought a cell phone and the contract was 30 pages long, would you sign it? Or would you go to another carrier? You don't know what's in those 30 pages, and furthermore, you don't feel like sitting down and reading all of it to find out. That's why cell phone companies don't have 30-page contracts. They know people wouldn't stand for it, and they'd buy from their competition. But we don't have any competition in government. It's take it or take it. There's no leave it. It's government. Passing all this spending in smaller targeted bills is a good thing. It's something we should be doing every year instead of piling all of it into huge bills that no one has any time to wade through. This is what we need to be pushing our congressional representatives to do. Sure, they need to oppose Obamacare, but they also need to oppose any other non-constitutional legislation that comes down the road as well. All right, we're up on the half-hour break already here on the Patrick Riggin Show. After the break, we'll hit on a few more things I've noticed this week during all the government shutdown hoopla. Plus, we'll read a column or two about things you might have forgotten about during all the commotion. That's all when we come back here on the Patrick Riggin Show on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
I got myself undressed. I ain't ready for the altar, but I do agree there's...
Welcome back. Knocking out the Washington establishment with infallible logic and reason. This show is like holy water to the money-sucking vampires in government. They can be defeated. This show, combined with your effort, there we go. We can bring that about working together. Let's put it that way. It's only a matter of time and pressure. Welcome back here to the Patrick Riggin Show on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and locally on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Every commercial break, it seems like I get things popping into my mind that I want to talk about. Something I've forgotten during the previous segment or a new take on an issue, and it really wreaks havoc with the notes I make during show prep. But hey, that's what makes it fun, right? And if I don't get to something during the show, I usually try to get it posted on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Patrick Riggin Show. That's facebook.com/Patrick Riggin Show altogether. And you don't have to be a member of Facebook to read that page. Just type that web address in and ignore all that sign-up stuff that pops up. But thinking about Obamacare and the shutdown during the break, I've been hearing all these people in government, well, I guess out of government too, but when I hear them talking about Obamacare, they keep chanting, "It's the law, it's the law." It's almost like they're in a cult or something. But that's the new talking point now, or actually the old talking point. Obamacare is the law, as if that means everything's okay. No, it's not the law, because it violates the Constitution. But Patrick, the Supreme Court said it was constitutional. Despite what you've been taught, the Supreme Court is not the final say on the Constitution. We are, the citizens of the United States. We are the ones who are on the other side of this equation. The government gets its power from us. We give it permission to do certain things and only those things. It's not the other way around. The citizens have all the rights, all the power, all the permissions to do whatever we want as long as we aren't infringing on someone else's rights. The government is given certain defined and limited permissions to do things we assign it to do. That's it. If the government does something outside those permissions, then it's acting outside the law, outside the bounds we placed on it. And if it's doing that, then technically, should you be bound to it? Look, the government isn't a thing. You can't point to something and say, there's government. That's government. You can point to buildings. You can point to documents. But you can't point to something and say, hey, there's government right there. You can point to people. You can point to someone and say, hey, there's Patrick. I'm a human being. You're a human being. You can even point to animals and houses, mountains and trees, any of those, and say, there it is. With government, you can't do that because government isn't a thing. It's an idea. It's an agreement among a group of people to give some of their power to another set of people to act as, well, their emissaries, as their ambassador. Our set of rules for our government is the Constitution. We as citizens agree to allow these other people to act for us in certain areas of our lives as long as they abide by the rules laid out. If they start acting outside those rules, then those people are violating the agreement we had with them. So how can we be bound by the set of rules if the other party isn't going to obey them? If we agree that you're going to mow my lawn for $50, you can't trim the hedges and then charge me an extra $50 for that too. I didn't agree to that. I only agreed to pay you for mowing the lawn. You can't say, well, I decided you needed those hedges trimmed, so I went ahead and cut them, so you owe me that extra $50. No, you acted outside our agreement, so I'm not bound by whatever extra you do. Making that same argument, if the government acts outside the agreement we have with it, that being the Constitution, then am I bound by whatever law it passes? Technically, no, I'm not. It is acting outside the bounds of our agreement. But Patrick, the Supreme Court, you're forgetting about that. No, I'm not. The Supreme Court was created by the same Constitution that created the Congress and the presidency. So let's say in our agreement to mow my yard, we also agree that one of your employees is going to determine whether what you do is within our contract or not. Do you see where this is going? We create a contract to mow my yard. It states that all you'll do is mow my yard, and in return, I'll pay you $50. Now, when you trim my hedges and say, that's included in this contract, and I owe you another $50, the person who gets to decide who is right, hey, they also work for you. Does that sound like I'll get a fair hearing? Possibly. But their paycheck is signed by you, not me. If they say I owe you that extra $50 for trimming the hedges, they know they might get some extra money as well. Would you sign that contract if that was the case? Well, of course not. You would say, I'll give you $50 to mow my yard. If I said, what if there's a dispute about what I'm supposed to do? Who will decide who is right? You'll say, there is no dispute. Mow my yard and that's it. This is what's happening in our country today. We have an out-of-control government acting outside the bounds of the Constitution, the agreement we all have, and when we think the government is doing something outside the rules outlined in that document, we have to go to another government employee, in this case the Supreme Court, to decide who is right. Someone who's getting paid by the same government we have a problem with. So are we surprised when this government employee rules in favor of the people signing their paycheck? This is what Thomas Jefferson warned us about. He wrote, quote, but the opinion which gives to the judges the right to decide what laws are constitutional and what not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislature and executive also in their spheres, would make a judiciary a despotic branch. He's warning us that giving the Supreme Court the final say on whether something is constitutional or not makes it a dictator. The dictator of a the dictator of a country decides what's legal or not, what's allowed or not. The dictator is the supreme ruler of the land. If the Supreme Court were to be this final say on whether something's constitutional or not, then the Constitution would say that, but it doesn't. The people, the citizens of this nation, are the final say on whether something is constitutional. Well, why is that? Because we created it. The government didn't. The Supreme Court didn't. It was us, the citizens of this country. But we're taught all through school the Supreme Court makes the final ruling on laws. It has the final say on whether something's allowed or not. We're taught that because that's what the government wants you to think. Thomas Jefferson also stated, to consider the judges as ultimate arbiters of the constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed. Now, I've read that quote before, but what he's emphasizing is giving the judges the final say on the Constitution is very dangerous. They don't have to answer to voters because they're appointed for life. And they're only human. They make the same mistakes we all make. They wish to make a name for themselves just like other people in office do. And they can be intimidated. Just look at Judge Roberts ruling in favor of Obamacare. Public pressure, and he changes his vote. This is how the government wants you thinking. This is how you're taught in school. The Supreme Court, these government employees are the final arbiters of whether something is constitutional or not. That's why I say if you send your children to a school run by the government, don't expect them to be taught about freedom and liberty. Because government isn't about freedom and liberty. It's about the control of a population, a country, us. All right, we're up on the last break here of the Patrick Riggin Show. It's already upon us. That sounds slightly Shakespearean, doesn't it? When we return here on the Patrick Riggin Show, we'll mop up the rest of this stuff I wanted to get to before the end of the hour. Stay tuned for an information-packed last segment.
I've been careless with a delicate man.
Welcome back to the Patrick Riggin Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and locally on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Kind of jumping right into this segment. We got a lot to get to here in this really short segment, but one thing I want to mention real quick. One of the perils of living in a free society is that someone is going to be trying to take away your freedom. Just look at history. The ink wasn't even dry on the Constitution, and Congress was looking for ways around it, doing things that weren't authorized. And we had our war against the British for our independence, and we won. Now, it seems like there's a segment of our country who thinks this is the only way to bring about change in our government as well. And I'll just address this straight up, just like I do everything else on this show. If you think you're going to war against the government of the United States, well, you're just going to lose. You aren't going to have the support of the rest of the population of this country. Well, that's fine, Patrick. If I have to go down fighting, then so be it. Really? You do realize no one is going to remember what you did in a year or so. It isn't going to rally people to your cause. If anything, it's going to drive people away from your ideas and play right into the government's hands. The talking heads will all say, see, these people talking about obeying the Constitution are all anti-government. They're all crazy, and you can't trust them. Do you notice how you'll be doing more harm than good for the cause of getting back our freedom and liberty? Fighting the government head-on isn't going to work. You have to defeat it with your votes, your participation, getting good people into office. And no, it won't be easy. Do you think winning our independence from England was easy? Do you think the outcome was always assured? Well, of course not. But we continue to fight for independence. And fast forward to today, our weapon now is the vote, not the gun. We had to use guns against England because we didn't have the vote. That restricted who could fight because, well, you have to be able to aim. You have to have ammunition. You have to be able to shoot and kill another human being. It's so much easier now. All you have to do is go vote. That's it. Vote. That and make sure everyone you know votes as well. There isn't any camping in the woods. There's no hiding from enemy patrols, no taking your life into your own hands and walking into battle. All you have to do is vote. You have it so much easier than the patriots who originally fought for our independence. So much easier, yet a lot of you don't go do it. Or you don't make sure your friends are voting. And there's simply no excuse for it. Look, the majority of this country believes as we do. Every time the majority turns out to vote, the more conservative of the candidates gets into office. When those people sit at home because they aren't happy with the candidates, the more liberal candidate gets in. That's why I say over and over, even last week, get out and vote even if you're voting third party. No matter whether you think that party has a shot or not, By casting your vote for that candidate, you're lending credibility to the arguments they made on the campaign trail. And if enough people are voting for them, the two major parties will start leaning in that third party's direction. Just look at how libertarianism is starting to infiltrate the conversation in this country today. The political establishment's attacking it. Conservative politicians and commentators are now all of a sudden seeing the light. If these ideas weren't starting to catch on, well, no one would bother acknowledging them. Well, I'm just going to wait for government to collapse. Things are going to be even worse then. Then we're talking about martial law, and the government has plenty of weapons to quell any dissent. Don't think for a second they won't use them on their fellow citizens. If you think differently, just ask the people in Waco. And these people all say, well, I have a bunch of guns and ammunition. I'll take care of anyone who wants to step foot on my property. Well, yes, and you may go down fighting, but you're going to go down. No two ways about it. Instead of letting it get to that, though, why don't we do this? Why don't we participate in government and get things changed? Let's get this turned around now so we don't get to that situation then. Do you know what happens if we go the other way? If the government is out killing these people, making their last stands against tyranny? We're killing off all the patriots who have a backbone and will stand up against oppression. Then we're left with a compliant population, which is exactly what the government wants. By going that route, you're just helping them. A much better plan is to harness all this energy being spent in getting ready to fight the government in this last big battle and start getting good people elected to government. If we spent half of that energy and time going to political party meetings, campaigning for candidates, heck, even running yourself, and make that proud and courageous stand in Congress, just like we're seeing with a lot of these Tea Party people, we'd have no problem electing good people to office then. That's all we have to do is get out there and vote for them. All of this other stuff, well, yes, you need to defend yourself. You need to defend your property. But going about it that way, in my opinion, is not the best way to do it, because we're not going to make a permanent change to this country, and our children and our grandchildren demand that we do. We don't want them having to fight the government, so let's get this changed now so they don't have to. All right, unfortunately, we're out of time here on the Patrick Riggins Show. If you want more information about us, go over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. And if you want our archives, they're at youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. And if you want to email me, again, patrickrigginshow@gmail.com. Hey, remember, liberty begins with you. It's in your mind. Don't forget that as you go throughout this week. Join me next Saturday afternoon at 4, where we'll be fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
Read dozens of books about heroes and crooks, and I learned much from both of their styles.
Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on The Patrick Riggins Show.